This is the third Sunday of Easter, one of the glorious seasons of the church year. It's my favorite season. And it's my favorite season because essentially each and every one of us are children of the resurrection. Not Christmas, not Good Friday, the resurrection. None of it makes any sense without that. None of it. So being children of the resurrection, the church, in its wisdom, sets aside the Sabbath of the year, 50 days, to celebrate the Easter. Celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Now, during this great 50 days in history, some strange things happened, and you may not know this or not. For example, you may have wondered what happened to the confession every Sunday. Didn't do it in the great 50 days. Also, in the earliest church, they did not kneel. Kneeling was forbidden during the great 50 days. And that was because the resurrection posture is one of standing, one of being ready to go out into the world, proclaim the gospel. The posture of the Passover, eaten in haste, being ready to leave quickly. And that was the earliest posture for the prayer, for public prayer. Private prayer was kneeling, but public prayer was not. In the early church, of course, there were no pews. Some places it was a marketplace. But in other places, the people in the congregation stood. Bishop sat in the chair. Cathedra meaning chair. Preached for 4 hours. Boy, have we changed. We finally let you sit down, make us stand up, and 20 minutes, 10 minutes, that's about all you get. Things do change. But during this season of resurrection, we need to always remember that's exactly who we are, children of the resurrection. Now, in this third Sunday of Easter, a couple of my favorite lessons come up. The first one is from Acts of the Apostles, and we read a lot from the Acts of the Apostles during this 50 days, is the conversion of Paul. Or as some people say, when he gets whacked upside the head with a 2x4. Now, lest you all think that's funny, men in particular, I would remind you, men, that the women always answered Christ by faith. It was the men he had to smack upside the head with a 2x4 to get their attention. So anyway, Paul gets knocked off his horse, high horse you could say, and has an encounter with Jesus. Now, one of my favorite books was a book called There is Algae on the Baptismal Font. Think of that. There's algae on the baptismal font. And it was written by a psychiatrist whose only clients were clergy. And he talked about how the majority of clergy felt guilty because they did not have a road to Damascus experience like Paul did in their being called to ministry. Well, think about that. I would say, thanks be to God, we haven't all had that kind of experience. What kind of church would we be? I'm afraid to say. I'm not sure we would be a church of community. If the normative way to experience the Lord and be converted is to be knocked off your horse, made blind, and then have scales fall off your eyes. But for Paul, it was necessary. For Paul, it worked. Each of us has our own experience of being called into the service of God. Each one is unique. People have asked me, how did I experience the call to become a priest? And literally, it was a dream. In that dream, Jesus was in the center of the circle and the apostles were around him. And he broke the circle, came out, took me by the hand, and brought me into the middle. That was the dream. Luckily, he didn't disguise it. Pretty sure about what he was intending. Maybe I did need to have a 2x4 up beside my head, I don't know. But that's the way it works. Now, the other lesson we have today is breakfast on the beach in the Gospel according to John. Now, all of us know that John's Gospel is a little bit different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those are called the Synoptic Gospels because they all kind of are alike in one form or another, but not John. I mean, you know right from the get-go. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was... I mean, he starts off with that, and you realize, well, this guy's speaking a different language than the other three. But it's a gospel that is like an onion. Take off a peel, you got another layer. Take off a peel, you got another layer. You just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into it. In today's story, we have the threefold restoration of Peter. Remember, Peter denied Jesus how many times? 3. So how many times does Jesus ask, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? What's going on here, the English language doesn't catch it, is a play on words. Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? Agape. Peter answers, yes, Lord, I love you. Philios. Now, the agape is that all-encompassing love that creates community. Philios is kind of saying, oh, I like you. It's not that deep and abiding love. And it took 3 times for Peter to come around. Now, every time we have a lesson from John's Gospel, I am reminded of my New Testament professor in seminary. His name was Howard Reese. Howard was probably 72 at the time. And to read him on the surface, you would think he was the biggest skeptic in the world. He said, when you study the Gospels, and he got a piece of chalk and on the chalkboard wrote this big I. He said, look at it with a fishy eye, he said. Look at it with a fishy eye. He had other sayings about preaching. There ain't nobody listening, no how. He talked about John's Gospel and how various scholars have looked at it. One of the foremost scholars was Bultmann. And he said, Mr. Bultmann's way of thinking how the Gospel of John was created, it goes like this. The compiler was compiling all the stories and had them all neat in a nice big pile ready to go. And a Filipino houseboy came in, plugged in the fan, and the papers went everywhere. At which point he died. Boom! And 73 years old, bang! He literally went down on the floor in class. We thought he died. And then he got up and he said, and then they got a bunch of seminarians to put it back together again. And that's what John's gospel is. It's an interesting way to look at it. There's always more going on in John's gospel than meets the eye. But at least John was honest about the gospel. Do you remember how it ends? Jesus did many more things than I have told you about. But I told you about these so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Resurrection. Each of us is called to experience that. Now, one of the things that Howard Reese would talk about, the disciples, was his favorite term for them was the 12 hammerheads. Seems like they didn't ever get it. They didn't ever get it. And so we are called to look at these people and see how they struggled. And we too struggle to know the risen Lord. One of the things growing up, I often wondered, why is it the disciples never recognized Jesus after the resurrection? I mean, my God, he was with them all these years. They went in the garden, prayed, and did all those things, saw the miracles, and he comes raised from the dead, and they don't know who he is. Talk about short-term memory. Well, the reason for that is the Greek word for resurrection does not mean bodily reanimation. Does not mean that at all. It means radical transformation. So Jesus was radically transformed such that they could not recognize who he was until he broke bread, said, "Peace be with you. Let's have some breakfast." Then they understood who he was. That's one of the reasons when I was filling in for Cindy on sabbatical, I began in the opening part of the service asking the question, what was your moment closest to Christ? Because he's not always recognizable. We have to be looking. We have to be looking to see him and find him and encounter him. And the interesting thing about that is sometimes the answer to that question for someone may be that you were the Christ then, or I was the Christ. But we have to look. We have to be aware. Being people of the resurrection, we yearn to see Christ, and we yearn to make him known. Remember in the baptismal covenant it says, will you by word and example proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ? And that is the good news. And the answer is, I will with God's help. So who we are as Christians is essentially people of the resurrection. People who are up, animated, active, not passive, going out, searching for Jesus, and being Jesus for some people. That's resurrection life. And that's what we celebrate these great 50 days of who we are as people of God. Hallelujah, Christ is risen.